can start. It's 8 o'clock, so we can start. So we started recording, so no problem. Shilpa, you have the text?
Yes,
Go ahead,
yes,
read.
I will,
At,
yes.
yeah.
At first, however, the Gita takes up the Vedic statement of the idea of sacrifice and praises the law of sacrifice in its current terms. This it does with a definite object. We have seen that the quarrel between renunciation and works has two forms. The opposition of Sankhya and Yoga, which is already in principle reconciled, and the opposition of Vedism and Vedantism, which the teacher has yet to reconcile. The first is a larger statement of the opposition in which the idea of works is general and wide. The Sankhya starts from the notion of the divine status as that of the immutable and inactive Purusha, which each soul is in reality, and makes an opposition between inactivity of Purusha and activity of Prakriti. So its logical culmination is cessation of all works. Yoga starts from the notion of the divine as Ishvara, Lord of the operations of Prakriti, and therefore superior to them. And its logical culmination is not cessation of works, but the soul's superiority to them and different even though doing all works. The opposition of Vedism and Vedantism works karma are restricted to Vedic works and sometimes even to Vedic sacrifice and ritualized works, all else being excluded as not useful to salvation. Vedism of the Mimamsakas insisted on them as the means, Vedantism taking its stand on the Upanishads looked on them as only a preliminary belonging to the state of ignorance, and in the end to be overpassed and rejected, an obstacle to the seeker of liberation. Vedism worshipped the devas, the gods, with sacrifice and held them to be the power who assist our salvation. Vedantism was inclined to regard them as the powers of the mental and material world opposed to our salvation. Man says the Upanishads are the cattle of the gods who do not desire men to know and to be free. It saw the divine as the immutable Brahman who has to be attained not by works of sacrifice and worship, but by knowledge. Works only lead to material result and to an inferior paradise. Therefore, they have to be renounced.
Therefore, they have to be renounced. This is not Srebdo's idea at all. It is the idea of the inferior Vedism. Okay. So, let us look at what he's saying. It's a little, he has gone into the old um, knowledge of the philosophies. Okay, he is talking of the Sankhya philosophy, the Mimamsa philosophy, and the Karma Yoga. Okay, so what is the difference? So as we read, we will make things clear. Okay. At first, however, the Gita takes up the Vedic statement of the idea of sacrifice and phrases the law of sacrifice in its current terms. Phrases is a verb, okay? It's not a noun. And he's saying it puts it in the language of the law of sacrifice. That's what it means. So the Gita has to now explain what the Vedic statement is. Because if you remember, the Veda at one point says that the Vedism is absolute ignorance. It goes very far. Okay, they are only interested in material gains. So now it has to explain what it means by the statement. Because in elsewhere, in another place, the Gita gives a huge amount of respect to the Vedas. So we should not think that it is decrying the Vedas. It is actually criticizing the users of the Vedas for a specific kind of work. So the ones who use the Vedic mantras for material gains in the world, that it is condemning. Gita is condemning. But if you use the Veda, this sacrifice, the mantras of the Veda, as an offering to the divine, and don't ask for any material gains, but only do it as a sacrifice to the divine, of course expecting liberation, that the Gita approves. Okay, so keep that in mind. So now we start looking at what it means. This it does with a definite object. And the object is to reconcile reconcile Sankhya with Karma Yoga. Because the Sankhya is saying that you have to separate yourself from the body, mind, life and do as little work as possible in the physical world, because the works are going to give you desire and attachment if you remain in the world. But the yoga says, no, we can use the works in the world to make it a sacrifice. And if we do that, then we can get liberation also. Okay, that's what they hold. So the difference between the two is that Sankhya is saying, don't do works because it will give you attachment and desire. So renounce the works in the physical world. Yoga is saying, no, not at all. We can use the works as a step ladder. We can use it as a springboard to go to the divine. And what is the renunciation then? Renunciation of the desire in the mind. That is the important thing. There is an outward physical renunciation, which the ascetic does. He renounces the world and goes away. So, this Karma Yoga says that is not necessary. You need not give up the physical world. You can remain in the physical world and still do works because you have cut the link of desire and attachment and ego in the mind, in the vital. Psychological renunciation. And if you do the psychological renunciation perfectly, then there is no need to stop action in the physical world. You can continue to do what you are doing. The difference is, as I said, we use a very interesting image of the eating the rasgulla. Rasgulla. It makes it very clear. Okay. The Karma Yoga is saying, if you use rasgullas, you will get attachment to it and you will have desire to eat more. So give it up. Karma Yoga is saying, I will give up the desire to eat. Whether I eat or not is not important. I will give up the desire in the mind. And if I have managed to succeed in that, suppose I have no desire in the mind, whether I eat the rasgulla or not is not important at all. That's the difference between the two. Okay? And the Gita supports the second one. The Gita says also not necessary to give up physical works. Even the Isha Upanishad also says that. Na karma lipyate nare. Action does not necessarily bind you to works. It does normally to the normal man who does not do action as a sacrifice to the divine. Even when you are eating a rasgulla, if you think that you are giving it to the divine and then eating, slowly, it will give you liberation and desire will go away. Okay, that's our idea. So now we read the text. This it does. It is the Gita. It does with a definite object. We have seen that the quarrel between renunciation of works has two forms. Okay, the opposition of Sankhya and Yoga, which is already in principle reconciled, and the opposition of Vedism and Vedantism, which the teacher has yet to reconcile. So how has he reconciled Sankhya and Yoga? Sankhya says, get rid of desire. And Yoga is also saying, get rid of desire. But the methods are different. One is renouncing the physical world, and the other is renouncing the desire in the mind. Okay, so the result is the same for both, but the means in the physical world is different. Okay, so this is what is being said. Then now Vedism and Vedantism has to be also harmonized, which the teacher has yet to reconcile. The first is a larger statement of the opposition, in which the idea of works is general and wide. Okay, what they mean? The first is the Vedism. That's the one. The idea of works is general and wide. It includes all works in the physical world. Okay. So Vedantism which the teacher is. The first is a larger statement of the opposition, it is the idea of works is general and wide. It includes all works. The Sankhya starts with the notion of the divine status as that of the immutable and inactive Purusha, which each soul is in reality, and makes an opposition between inactivity of Purusha and activity of Prakriti. So Sankhya is saying the divine is there only in the self, in the Brahmic consciousness, in the Purusha, in the inactivity of Purusha. And the activity of Prakriti, the divine is not there. So this is what the Sankhya is saying. So you have to go to the self and not be in the world, give up the world. So its logical culmination is cessation of all works. So you have to stop all works, except of course those minimum which you need to maintain your body. You have to eat, you have to sleep, but don't do any other work, not necessary. Okay. In today's world, it is hardly possible because you have to maintain yourself. How will you maintain yourself unless you do a job? But anyway, those days, those who were, there was a joint family system, no? So it was much easier. But today it is not possible. We have the, what is it called? The nuclear family. It has come down to only the child and the parents and the separate. Okay. So this is Sankhya philosophy. The difference between inactivity of Purusha, the immutable Purusha, and the activity of Prakriti. So the logical culmination is cessation of all works. That is in the Sankhya philosophy. You can't say that it is absolutely wrong because it does lead to liberation. But there is a more inclusive method. That's the Karma Yoga. The Karma Yoga is, in the Gita, it refers to as a yoga. Okay, you have to be very clear about the terms. In the Gita, yoga means Karma Yoga. Now it starts a slightly different standpoint. The yoga, Karma Yoga, starts from the notion of the divine as Ishvara, Lord of the operations of Prakriti, and therefore superior to them. Okay, so the operations of Prakriti, the Ishvara is superior to them. Okay? So it doesn't matter if it is there. And its logical culmination is not cessation of works, but the soul's superiority to them and freedom, even though doing all works. Okay? So the Sankhya says that the divine is only there in the self. And the Karma Yoga is saying the divine is not only in the self, but he is actually Lord at the highest level. And when he is Lord, he is the one doing the works in the physical world. So if you go to the level of the Lord, which is the third level, then you can continue to do works in the physical world without any problem. That's the whole difference. So the problem is solved there because in any case you get liberation. Then, in the opposition, now he's taking up the opposition of Vedism and Vedantism. So I'm explaining very clearly. Let's see what he said. In the opposition of Vedism and Vedantism, works, karma, are restricted to Vedic works. Okay? The difference is that it is restricted only to Vedic works, not to, when you're discussing these two terms, the works is not all work. Whether you are an engineer or a doctor or even a sweeper of the floor, in the difference between Sankhya and Karma Yoga, works means all works. But here when you're discussing Vedism and Vedantism, it is only Vedic works. And what are those Vedic works he is explaining. And sometimes even to Vedic sacrifice and ritualized works. Ritualized works, pujas, okay, archanas, all these type of things are restricted to Vedic works, and sometimes even to Vedic sacrifice and ritualized works. All else being excluded as not useful for salvation. So in the idea of Vedism and Vedantism, remove all works, but concentrate only on those works which are necessary for your ritualized works, pujas, as I said, okay, and worshipping and giving the, putting flowers in front of the images. That's a work that Vedic works. Rituals, all is being excluded. Now he comes to again another aspect. The Mimamsa philosophy, okay, is a philosophy which has got two aspects. It's called Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda. The Mimamsa was interpreted at that time, 2500 years ago, in two ways. There is a Karma Kanda and there is a Jnana Kanda, which is deriving straight from the Vedism and Vedantism, okay, of the Gita. So, Vedism of the Mimamsakas insisted on them as the means. Okay? Vedism said that you have to do that. Vedantism, taking its stand on the Upanishads, looked on them as only a preliminary belonging to the state of ignorance, and in the end to be overpassed and rejected, an obstacle to the seeker of liberation. So works in the physical works are not to be done. And Vedism, the Mimamsakas, you have to use them as a means. The Vedic sacrifices, ritualized works. Whereas Vedantism, which looks on the Upanishads, says it is not necessary even to do those type of rituals. So, there is a difference. In other words, Vedism insists on doing the rituals, whereas the Vedantism says not necessary. And this is the difference between the two. One leads to the knowledge aspect, and the other leads to the enjoyment aspect. Okay? So these are the two differences. Looked on them as only a preliminary, belonging to the state of ignorance, and in the end to be overpassed and rejected, an obstacle to the seeker of liberation. Vedism, okay, worship the devas, the gods, with sacrifice and held them to be the powers who assist our salvation. I'll make it even more specific. Vedism means those who are worshipping the gods. Okay, you are worshipping very often Ganesha. Ganesha is only a god; he is not the supreme divine. Okay, remember that. So the Vedism says we consider gods are the givers of boons, so we will worship them, but they are at a lower level. Okay, so Vedism worship the devas, the gods, and the gods can be there even in the mental worlds. They are even there sometimes. They are used in a very loose way. The devas, they are there even in the higher vital worlds. So they are to be worshipped with sacrifice and held them to be the powers who assist our salvation. They will help us. Vedantism, that's the Upanishad, the knowledge aspect, was inclined to regard them as powers of the mental and material world. There you are, at a lower level. The gods, they are using the word God, but don't get confused. The gods are lower beings and the divine is the highest. Okay? Very clearly you have to make a distinction between the two. The gods are lower. Okay? So, with sacrifice, there is one. Yeah. Vedantism was inclined to regard them as powers of the mental and material world opposed to our salvation. Sometimes they don't want you to go beyond themselves. Men, says the Upanishad, are the cattle of the gods who do not desire man to know and be free. Okay? So, it saw the divine as the immutable Brahman who has to be attained not by works of sacrifice and worship, but by knowledge. So, Vedantism goes through knowledge, Jnana Yoga. Okay? So, works only lead to material results and to an inferior paradise. Therefore, they have to be renounced. So, no works at all, not necessary. That's it. Vedantism. Okay. So, now we can go to the next one. I think it's clear. The Mimamsakas, as I said, there is a Karma Kanda and there is a Jnana Kanda. The Karma Kanda is the one that says Vedism, do the works of sacrifice. And The Jnana Kanda is Vedantism. It says that no, it's not necessary to do anything. You have to get only knowledge. And don't do works in the physical world. Okay, that's the difference. All this is not so important. Gita is actually differentiating the old yogas and the old philosophies and methods. But the Gita's main philosophy is very clearly stated elsewhere. So all this discussion about philosophy and all this, we can take it with a pinch of salt. It's not that important for us. But to understand the Veda, yes, it is important. But for the application of Gita in the physical world, these discussions are not really necessary. Okay, so now we read the last one. Pallavi has to read. They have got 15 minutes. So we've got more than enough time. 15, even slightly more than 15. So we can finish the chapter today. Pallavi, you read?
Yes, Rangana.
Yeah, go ahead. The Gita resolves this opposition.
The Gita resolves this opposition by insisting that the Devas are only forms of the one Deva, the Ishvara, the Lord of all yoga, and worship and sacrifice and austerity. And if it is true that sacrifice offered to the Devas leads only to material results and to paradise, it is also true that sacrifice offered to the Ishvara leads beyond them to the great liberation. For the Lord and the immutable Brahman are not two different beings, but one and the same being. And whoever strives towards either is striving towards that one divine existence. All works in their totality find their culmination and completeness in the knowledge of the divine. Sarvam karma khilam partha jnana paristamyate. They are not an obstacle, but the way to the supreme knowledge. Thus, this opposition too is reconciled with the help of a large elucidation of the meaning of sacrifice. In fact, its conflict is only a restricted form of the larger opposition between yoga and Sankhya. Vedism is a specialized and narrow form of yoga. The principle of Vedantists is identical with that of the Sankhyas, for to both, the movement of salvation is the recoil of intelligence, the buddhi, from the differentiating powers of nature, from ego, mind, senses, from the subjective and the objective, and its return to the undifferentiated and the immutable. It is with this object of reconciliation in his mind that the teacher first approaches his statement of the doctrine of sacrifice. But throughout, even from the very beginning, he keeps his eye on the not on the restricted Vedic sense of sacrifice and works, but on their larger and universal application. That widening of narrow and formal notions to admit the great general truths they unduly restrict, which is always the method of the Gita.
So how does the Gita reconcile all these things? It says that the gods are not necessarily something different from the divine. The idea is that matter is not the opposite of the divine, although it looks like that. Spirit and matter are not at all two different things. They are only their forms are different. Essentially, they are the same. So this philosophy is what is Sri main standpoint, and also the Gita's. The Gita is saying that spirit and matter, this actually Sri says that, but there Gita is saying that the devas who are at a lower level, okay, the beings that are there in the vital level and the beings that are there in the mental level, they are all inferior aspects of God, but they are not different. Essentially, they are all the same, which Sri carries to the extreme limit and says even the matter is the divine. But how to explain the difference in form? You can go back to the image of the ice, water vapor. Totally two, three different forms. And one who does not know will think that they are opposites. They are not opposites. They are essentially all water. Water can be ice. Water can be the subtle water. It can also be the liquid water, and it can also be gaseous water, water vapor. So exactly the same way, the divine can make himself into matter. He can also make himself into prana and mind And he can also remain transcendently above, being himself and nothing else. So all these are possible, says the Gita. So now we read with this idea, we will read the paragraph. The Gita resolves this opposition by insisting that the devas are only forms of the one deva, the Ishwar. The Ishwar is at the third level. Okay? And at the lower levels, there are the devas, okay, like the overmind. Okay, if you remember, to come back to Srinivas's terminology, the third level is the Ishvara. And the Ishvara is impersonal as well as personal. Okay, he can be both. But in the second level of the spiritual planes of consciousness, normally you experience the divine as impersonal. It's only there is power, there is ananda, there is knowledge, there is peace, but there is nobody there. So, whereas if you go through the bhakti yoga, you get the experience of the divine as a person, but you may not have much of a knowledge. Okay, you may have great devotion and intimacy with the Lord, but you may not have knowledge. Of course, finally, all will lead to the same. Because if you have bhakti for the divine, he is not going to withhold knowledge from you, but he is going to take you. That's the principle of the integral yoga. Follow whatever path you want, ultimately it will all be the same. Okay? So, the Gita resolves this opposition by insisting that the devas are only forms of the one deva. Okay? Indra, okay? Ganesh, Kartik, and all these, they're all devas. They are at the overmental level and sometimes even at the mental level also. There are beings, all these beings are there who are semi-divine. The angels, the kinnaras, okay, the Gandharvas, they are all semi-divine creatures. So the Vedism is insisting on that. Whereas the Vedantism is saying, no, go to the Ishvara level. And from there, you will be able to continue to work in the physical world. That's the difference. I read each sentence now. The Gita resolves this opposition by insisting that the devas are only forms of the one deva, the Ishvara, the Lord of all yoga and worship and sacrifice and austerity. And if it is true that sacrifice offered to the devas leads only to material results and to paradise, it is also true that sacrifice offered to the Ishvara leads beyond them to the great liberation. Both are different stages of the liberation. Of course, the Ishvara is the highest level, and that's the most satisfying. That's why Srimdo also says you have to go to the supramental level. So, for the Lord and the immutable Brahman are not two different things. The Lord is level 3, okay? And the immutable Brahman is level 2. This is the spiritual planes of consciousness. And the Gita is saying are not two different things, but one and the same being, only in different form, that's all, at a lower level. And whoever strives towards either is striving towards that one divine existence. Okay? Whatever level you are, ultimately you will go to that last one. All works in their totality find their culmination and completeness in the knowledge of the divine. Now he is quoting from the 4th chapter, the 33rd verse. Sarvam karma kilam partha jnane parisamapyate. So all works, okay, karma kilam, akilam, all, total, every work that you do, sarvam. There is no need to remove certain types of works. Even if you are a football player, okay, no problem at all. Or a sweeper of the floor or a cook. Everything can be used for the liberation. Partha is Arjuna. Jnane parisamapyate. So whatever work you are doing, ultimately it will all end in knowledge. That's what it means of the divine. They are not an obstacle. This is also what the Gita also insists. There are many philosophers who say, no, very difficult. If you want to do works, you automatically you will get desire and attachment, and the ego will be there. Is there a truth in that? Largely, yes, there is a truth. But it's not an absolute truth. You can do works with detachment, not necessarily attachment. But the way to the supreme knowledge, they are not an obstacle, but the way to the supreme knowledge, if you continue to do works. Thus, this opposition too is reconciled with the help of a large elucidation of the meaning of sacrifice. This sentence is the indication that this is what he is going to take up in the next chapter. The meaning of sacrifice. What do you mean by sacrifice? Okay? It is not simply pouring ghee in a fire and reciting mantras and going on putting. That is not sacrifice. That's the outer form of the sacrifice. But there's another sacrifice, turning everything and doing it for the divine. That is the meaning, and that we'll see in the next chapter. The next chapter is the significance of sacrifice. What is meant by yajna? So, thus the opposition to is reconciled with the help of large meaning of sacrifice. In fact, its conflict is only a restricted form of the larger opposition between yoga and Sankhya. So, this is what he's saying. There is not much of a difference between the two. It's only a question of level. Vedism is a specialized, narrow form of yoga. Vedism, narrow form of yoga. The narrow form is do only works which are relevant to the pujas and the gods, worship and sacrifice. But yoga says all works can be included. So it's a larger form of Vedism, and Vedism is a narrower form of yoga. That's all. The principle of the Vedantists is identical with that of the Sankhyas. For to both, the movement of salvation is a recoil of the intelligence. Okay, if you want liberation, get away from your body-mind life. That's what it's saying. The buddhi, from the differentiating powers of nature. And what are the differentiating powers of nature? Ego, mind, senses. From the subjective to the objective. Get away from that. And it's returned to the undifferentiated and the immutable. The undifferentiated featurelessness and the immutable static condition. Okay? So very clearly, it references the second level. The undifferentiated and the immutable is the Brahman consciousness. So you have to get away from your ego. Differentiating powers of nature are ego, attachment, and desire. And they are all lodged in the body, mind, and senses, from the subjective to the objective. And its return to the undifferentiated. Go away from your identification with body, mind, life, and go to the self, which is completely separated. There is no identification with the lower anymore. It is with this object of reconciliation in his mind that the teacher first approaches his statement of the doctrine of sacrifice. But throughout, even from the very beginning, he keeps his eye not on the restricted Vedic sense of sacrifice and works, but on their larger and universal application. You can do all works. That's what the Gita is saying. That widening of narrow and formal motions to admit the great general truths they unduly restrict, which is always the method of the Gita. You can do any work you want, and still you can get liberation. Maybe more difficult, but the result also will be much more inclusive, because if you are following the other path of the Jnana Yoga and then the Vedantism, what will happen is you will have no power in the physical world. But if you follow the Gita and the other method, continue to do works in the physical world, you will have power in the physical world, because you are going to go to the third level, and from there you will have power also in the physical world. Power and Ananda. You may not even have Ananda in the second level, this in the nirvana experience, there may not be any ananda. In fact, it's not there for Sridhar in the beginning. He said that when he attained the nirvana consciousness, the self, he was absolutely calm, quiet, absolutely without any emotion at all. There was no emotion. Okay, the emotion, knowledge, and all these things came later on. That's what it is. Okay, so we stop here today, and we will start the next one. Significance of sacrifice. What does the Gita mean by sacrifice? Okay, it's a very interesting discussion. Normally, when you say sacrifice, you have the idea that something very precious to me has been given away, and then you may feel the loss also of it. Okay, you may feel the loss, you may not feel the loss, but that is not the sacrifice. Okay, the sacrifice is turning all that you do, think, and emote to the divine. That's what the mean. So that's what we will do. Page 107, chapter 12. Okay. See you all for listening on the Gita next Saturday. We'll meet on Tuesday, of course. Okay. Au revoir, everybody.
Au revoir, Rangada.
Au
Thank
Thank you.
Merci.
Bless you.